Good morning, good afternoon. We will begin in just a few moments. Just going to wait a couple minutes and allow everyone to get registered and enrolled and joined into the room here. And again, just want to tell everyone good morning, good afternoon. We're going to wait at least one more minute, allow people to continue to join the room before we get started. So just be patient with us. All right, we are right at noon, but I see a few people are still slowly trickling in. So I'm going to wait one more minute before we get started. All right. Thank you everyone for joining us today for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility throughout the employee life cycle with Amy Albin. I'm going to go through a few housekeeping items before I pass the mic on over to Amy. Just want to let everyone know this session is being recorded and we will email everyone the recording after the event. We have captions available, so feel free to use them as needed. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put those into the chat or the Q&A box. Amy will be reaching out to you after the webinar. She will email you with answers to your questions. Again, just put them in the chat or in the Q&A. I'll make sure Amy gets all the information and she'll reach out to you after. And then lastly, I'd like to mention if anyone needs any accessibility support, training, or usability testing, I will send out an email with a link to schedule a time to speak to one of our experts after the webinar. And now with that, I'm going to let Amy get started and provide an introduction of herself.
Thank you, Carrie. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I am Amy Albin. I'm the Sparrows Learning and Development Coordinator, and I'm also Society for Human Resource Management Certified Professional. In addition to that, I have been totally blind since birth. I'm a recent college graduate with experience not too long ago with aspects of the beginning of the employee life cycle, in particular, the all-important job search. So that said, this discussion is going to be informed by professional experience and research, as well as insights gleaned from my personal experience. We're moving to slide 2. Here's the agenda. We're going to talk about the definitions of DEI and A, the strategic importance of DEIA, the stages of the employee life cycle with accessibility tips and success metrics. Now, some of you may be HR professionals and some of you may not. So bear with me if you already know some of the things that I covered today. And finally, we're going to put it all together and talk about how accessibility impacts diversity, equity, and inclusion. Slide 3, definitions. We tend to lump DEIA together, but they are distinct concepts. Diversity is about your demographics. So in the context of people with disabilities, how many people with disabilities do you have in your organization? And in which departments? And in what roles? Leadership roles, frontline roles, etc. When we talk about intersectionality, we're talking about the overlap among different identities. So you might look at the number of people with disabilities in your organization. It's a good number. You might look at the number of women in your organization. It's a good number. But when you look at the number of women with disabilities in your organization, then you find you don't have enough. But that is something that you would have missed without taking into account intersectionality. Equity empowers people by giving them equal opportunities to contribute to their full potential. Inclusion allows people to feel welcomed and valued, not despite who they are, but because of who they are. And finally, accessibility means that people can fully and independently access the environment, whether or not they have a disability. Slide 4, why it matters. I assume that most of you are here today at this webinar because you already know that accessibility matters and you want to know how to make it work for your workplace. But just in case you need some statistics to convince your leadership, a study by Accenture, which is one of the largest consulting firms, found that organizations that innovate around disability inclusion outperformed their competitors in the following ways. They make 1.6 times more revenue. They make 2.6 times more net income. They make 2 times more economic profit. And they're 25% more productive. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that makes a very good business case for accessibility. From a legal perspective, accessibility and accommodations are required by law in many areas. A well-known example is the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and there are other laws. And from a personal values perspective, if you believe, as I do, that everyone is entitled to an equitable, inclusive workplace, then you should optimize your organization for accessibility. Slide 5. Why does DEIA need to be strategic? Well, it requires complex coordination and skills and coordination of skills. This is not something that you can just say, I'm a good person, so of course I do DEIA correctly. Well, no, actually it requires skills and knowledge and coordination, and it's not something that can be done ad hoc. With priority, if DEIA is not a strategic priority, there tends to be a lot of resistance. So something else will always come first. And because of that resistance, it's important to have buy-in at all levels of leadership. It is the leadership that controls the incentives, that controls the budget, and ultimately controls the strategy and what gets done at the organization. So now on slide 6, we're going to briefly define the employee life cycle. And of course, we'll go into a lot more detail in later slides. The employee life cycle is the entire relationship between the employee and the organization, from pre-hire to post-offboarding. Very quickly, the stages are attraction, recruitment and selection, onboarding, retention, development, offboarding, and beyond. Slide 7, these accessibility tips apply to all of the stages. Assure that your organization is optimized for accessibility, that it's not just an afterthought, and that it's baked in throughout your systems and processes. Assure that your technology, both internal and third-party technology, is accessible. You can invest in professional audits and user testing through an organization like TPGI. Have a designated accessibility contact form where people are empowered to document their concerns. And this form should go to the person or people directly tasked with resolving these concerns. There is a ready-made solution if you are interested in getting feedback for issues specific to the JAWS screen reader. You can use TPGI's JAWS Connect. Slide 8, using success metrics. For each of the stages, I'm going to cover success metrics, but how do you use them? Well, take the metric for your entire population. So depending on what the stage is, that might be employees and that might be applicants. And then take that same metric and compare it with your people with disabilities. And that will show you where work might need to be done. So for example, if overall your job satisfaction rate among employees is very high, but among your employees with disabilities, it is very low, then that might suggest that accessibility or disability inclusion needs improvement in your organization. So now on slide 9, this is our first stage, which is attraction. This is before people even apply for your jobs. You need to determine what kind of candidates you want and then create branded materials to put your jobs and your organization in front of those candidates. Make sure that these branded materials are accessible. And while not a strict accessibility measure, you can demonstrate disability inclusion by incorporating the lives, the stories of your employees with disabilities into your promotional materials. Maybe they're talking about some of the accommodations they use and how they're successful at your organization. This will go a long way towards helping potential applicants with disabilities feel included. Slide 10, attraction success metrics. Candidate demographics. This is where we talked about diversity before. How many people with disabilities are applying for your jobs, what types of jobs, etc. Career page analytics. Who visits your career page? What actions do they take? How long do they stay on your page? Let's imagine that you find that people using assistive technologies, such as screen readers, spend significantly less time on your career page. That might indicate that the accessibility of your career page needs some work. Slide 11, our next stage is recruitment and selection. This involves creating job descriptions, maintaining communication with candidates, and assessing and selecting the best candidates. Slide 12. We have a lot of accessibility tips specific to this stage. As always, assure accessible technology. Make sure the language in the job description is accurate and free of bias. So, candidate must have a driver's license. Is this accurate? It depends. If you're hiring for a delivery driver, then yes, they need a driver's license, and more than that, they probably need a professional license. But what if you're hiring for a bank teller and your only objective is to make sure that that person can get to work each day? Well, I'm totally blind, so until we have widespread self-driving cars, the chances of me getting a driver's license are 0. But If I wanted to be a bank teller, I could take Uber, I could take Lyft, I could take public transportation. If the bank were close enough to where I live, I could even walk to the bank. So a better statement would be candidate must have reliable means of transportation. I'm going to give another example, ability to talk to customers. Maybe the candidate cannot physically talk to the customers, but they can type out what they want to say and have a computer read it back. And this candidate is qualified, and that is a valid means of communication. So a better description would be communicates with customers rather than talks with customers. Assure interview criteria are free of bias. A common example is eye contact. A lot of interviewers like it, but many people with disabilities, blind and low vision people, some autistic people, struggle with eye contact, don't prefer eye contact. Eye contact is not relevant for them. So that's an example of a criteria that could be eliminated because of bias. Assure that assessments are accessible. And there are so many online assessments. Even when I was applying for jobs 2 years ago, it was very common that I would encounter an assessment that was not accessible. Maybe it had diagrams, maybe I wasn't able to get extra time. A lot of times there wasn't anyone that I could contact to ask for accommodations. But even if there was, I would be hesitant to do so because in my experience, my vast experience, accommodations take longer than they should. And I was worried that by the time I got my accommodation, that the next candidate would have been chosen. So that's why it's very important to communicate a clear process to all applicants for requesting pre-hire accommodations. Remember that these accommodations may be different than the accommodations used by an employee. And finally, make sure that the accommodations can be delivered in a timely fashion and that applicants know this and won't have to worry about it. So on slide 13, recruitment and selection success metrics. Candidate satisfaction, we have net promoter scores. How likely are they to recommend your organization? Offer acceptance rate. Time to hire. If it's taken you a long time to find talent, make your organization more accessible and you will have much more talent because you will have people with disabilities, which are an underutilized talent pool. Application completion rate. Just like the career page, what if you find that people using assistive technology routinely start the job application and don't finish? You might look further and find, well, they're all stopping on page 3. Then maybe you want to start looking at page 3 to see, is there something that could be improved in the accessibility of that application? Slide 14, our next stage is onboarding. And this is more than orientation, it includes orientation. Whereas orientation typically takes a few days, onboarding, when done right, can take from 6 months to a year. It involves making sure that employees fill out their paperwork, training them on the tasks of their job and their skills, but it also involves getting accustomed and socialized to the organization's culture. And this is done through methods like mentorship and buddy programs. As always, make sure that these onboarding programs, documents, etc., are accessible. And also, just like in the previous stage, ensure a clear process that is communicated to all applicants for requesting accommodations on the job. And these accommodations, as I said it before, but it's worth saying again, may be different than the accommodations used by applicants. Slide 15. success metrics for onboarding. Time to productivity. If it's taken people with disabilities longer to be productive, maybe there is an aspect of the job or the training that's not accessible. New hire satisfaction is another one. Slide 16, retention. This is based on a foundation of employee listening. Things like exit interviews, engagement surveys, stay interviews, figuring out what employees want, and then creating programs to engage them so that they will stay in your organization. And specific programs and methods include things like flexible work schedules, wellness programs, job rotation, enlargement, and enrichment programs, which I'm going to define briefly. In a job rotation program, people move from one job to another temporarily in the organization. Job enlargement and enrichment are more permanent. In job enlargement, you are adding more responsibilities to the person's job at the same level. In job enrichment, you're adding more responsibilities at a higher level. So maybe they're getting some people to manage that they didn't have before, or more decision-making authority. So slide 17, I'm going to give two hypothetical examples. The first one involves wellness programs, and specifically wellness might mean different things to different people. So imagine that you want to increase fitness among your employees, and you create a competition where people are going to track how much they walk. They count their steps using a digital app. The person with the highest number of steps at the end of the month wins a prize. And to facilitate the competitive spirit, you have a leaderboard where the top 5 winners' names are announced for all to see. Now, what if one of your employees is a wheelchair user and can't walk at all? Is it sufficient to say, this doesn't matter, we don't need to accommodate them because it's a bonus, it's not an essential job function? No, that is not sufficient, because you are denying that person the opportunity to have the engagement program and to win the prize, potentially. So what can you do? It starts with an interactive dialogue. Ask the employee, what do they do to stay fit, to stay healthy? And incorporate that into the competition. You might make an accommodation just for that one employee, but you might decide, do you know what? I want to increase the options for all of our employees. So maybe it's not just walking. Maybe it's also yoga, stretching, even healthy eating. That can be avenues towards winning that contest. And the second example is going to be about a job rotation program. So you are tasked with increasing engagement among receptionists at a doctor's office. This doctor's office is large enough where there are 2 teams of receptionists. One team is responsible for answering the phones. The other team is responsible for working behind the desks and greeting patients as they arrive. And you want to create a program where one day a week, those 2 teams switch roles. One of your phone receptionists is totally blind, and they do very well in their current role. But one of the requirements for the desk role is to visually scan ID cards of patients, which currently your blind employee is not going to be able to perform in the job rotation. Again, are you just going to say it doesn't matter because it's not their regular job, they're doing fine in their regular job, they just don't have to participate in the job rotation program? Again, that's the wrong answer, because you still need to be equitable and provide the same opportunity. So again, it starts with an interactive dialogue. working with the individual to see what accommodation would work for them. Maybe you provide them with a human reader, someone to describe the picture on the ID card while the individual performs all the other functions. Or maybe you have a machine, a device that performs that task. But whatever you do, it's important to make sure that all of your employees, whether or not they have disabilities, have the opportunity to have the same or very similar equivalent experiences. Slide 18, retention success metrics. Employee retention rate. I have here the percentage of employees that stay after a year. The time period can be whatever you want to use in your organization, doesn't really matter. Voluntary turnover rate, and ENPS, which is the percentage of employees that rate your organization as an excellent workplace. Slide 19, the next stage is development. This involves things like performance management, career planning and management, mentorship, coaching, training, upskilling, cross-training, anything that gets your employees from where they are now to where they want to be. Slide 20, development accessibility tips. It's important to make sure that everyone has opportunities to reach all levels of achievement. So I'm going to take you back to that job rotation program at the doctor's office. And let's say you made a less than optimal decision and you decided not to accommodate the blind employee, and they just didn't participate in the program. So now performance reviews roll around, and this employee comes to you and they say, hey, I noticed that I got meets expectations on my performance review, but I really think I did well. I really think it should be exceeds expectations. Can you tell me what happened? And you, as their HR director, say, well, you did exceed expectations in all areas other than that job rotation program. And I understand you couldn't participate in that program because you couldn't see the ID cards. Also, don't worry, because meets expectations is still a good score, even though it's not the highest score. But what's not good is that that employee was denied the opportunity to achieve all levels on the scale. Now, to be very clear, I'm not saying at all that a person with a disability should automatically receive any score. If there's a mutually agreed on accommodation for the job rotation program and they perform poorly in that program, then they should not receive the high score. But the problem in this situation was that the opportunity was not even provided. Slide 21, development success metrics. Training return on investment. How much does it cost for you to deliver training, and how much value are you getting in return? Employee performance increase post-training. Are they doing better after the training than they were before the training, and by how much? Slide 22. Our next stage is offboarding. This involves ensuring as smooth as possible separation, whether it is voluntary or involuntary. Documenting reasons, especially for an involuntary termination. For voluntary terminations, conducting exit interviews to learn why people left and figure out how you can increase engagement and retention for your existing employees. Having a conversation with the terminated employee and providing them with the relevant documentation. Now on slide 23, a lot of these tips relate to the specifics of involuntarily terminating someone with a disability, or for that matter, anyone who might be part of a marginalized group. If the termination is involuntary, make sure that your reason is well documented. Assure that the person wasn't terminated either because of their disability or because a lack of accommodation or inaccessibility created a barrier for them to perform. Consistency. So let's say that you're going to fire an employee with a disability, giving the reason that they were late 3 times this month. But you also have another employee without a disability, also late 3 times within the same month that you're not firing. This could look very bad. This could look like potential discrimination. And that's why consistency is very important. If it is a voluntary termination, conduct an exit interview to determine whether any DEIA factors played a role in the decision to leave, and then target your questions towards what are some things that your organization can do to improve those factors going forward. Slide 24, offboarding success metrics. Exit interview completion rate, offboarding score, measuring how well your process is going. Slide 25, if you thought offboarding was the last stage of the employee life cycle, then I have news for you. It's important to continue to maintain relationships with employees even after they leave. This can be done through methods like continuing to send emails and having alumni networks. And the reason to do this, one very compelling reason, is that if you have really good employees that leave, you want them to become boomerangs, which are people who leave and then come back to work for you again. Make sure these communications are accessible, as always. Slide 26, success metrics for this final stage. Registrations to alumni networks and email open rates. I'm sure many of you can relate, as I can, to getting lots of emails every day from lots of organizations that we don't open. But if your alumni are opening your emails, that shows that they're dedicated to your organization. And if your alumni with disabilities are significantly less likely to open your emails, that might suggest that your emails need to be a bit more accessible. Slide 27. This is where we put it all together. How does the A impact the D, the E, and the I? Well, first, diversity. If you have an accessible employee life cycle, then people with disabilities are going to be more likely to apply for your jobs, accept your offers, stay at your organization, come back as boomerangs if they leave, and recommend your organization to other people, particularly those in their network who also have disabilities. This shows how accessibility can increase your disability representation and therefore diversity. Equity and accessibility go hand in hand. By providing an environment that people can fully and independently access, you're giving them the opportunity to contribute to their full potential. Inclusion. You could have partial, half-baked, ad hoc accessibility without inclusion. What does this look like? Maybe accommodations are late. Maybe people with disabilities are constantly being dragged away from their jobs or asked to work extra hours to educate you on how to provide them with accommodations. In this situation, people are likely not to feel included. They're likely to feel like a burden. However, if you have an organization that is optimized for accessibility, where accessibility is baked in throughout all the processes and systems, then people with disabilities are going to feel welcome, valued, included, not despite their disabilities, but because of their abilities and their unique talents that they have to offer. On slide 28, here are my sources and resources. And finally, slide 29. If you have questions, again, my name is Amy Albin, and you can email me at any time at aalbin@vispero.com. Thank you so much, everyone.
thank you everyone so much for attending. Again, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to Amy directly. The recording of the presentation will be sent out after it's over, likely either tomorrow or Friday, along with the slides. I will add Amy's email into the chat as well as our IDA email into the chat as well. If you have any additional questions, again, feel free to reach out to Amy and she will respond to you as needed. Any questions that have been asked in the chat or Q&A, I will send to Amy after the presentation so she can reach back out to you directly. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.